This video was brought to you by Nebula. The right being on the rise is a prominent narrative in Europe, and one that is borne out in polling ahead of the European parliamentary elections. But while it may come across as if the right, particularly the radical or far right, is one unified bloc on a seemingly unstoppable rise, it's actually a fractured bloc suffering from constant infighting. So in this video, we're going to explain the feuds and disputes that are dividing the European right, and what it means for its influence going forward. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. Now, we're going to start by giving a very quick overview of the right wing in Europe, using the political groups of the European Parliament as our guide. The largest right-wing group in the European Parliament, and the largest group overall, is the European People's Party, or EPP. This is basically the mainstream European centre-right, as its member parties are normally the main or traditional conservative parties in their countries, like the CDU in Germany, the Republicans in France, and so on. And the European Union has been traditionally, and still is, led by a grand coalition comprising the EPP, the broadly centrist Renew Europe group, and the centre-left Progressive Alliance of Socialists and Democrats, or S&D. But they're not the only conservatives in town. The second biggest right-wing group is the European Conservatives and Reformist group, or ECR. Now, the ECR is further to the right than the EPP, is softly Eurosceptic, and critical of further European integration. Its members include the Brothers of Italy, Law and Justice in Poland, Vox in Spain, and the Sweden Democrats. But finally, furthest to the right, and currently the smallest right-wing group in the European Parliament, is the Identity and Democracy Group, or ID, which comprises of parties that are often described as far-right, nationalist, populist, Eurosceptic, and so on. ID members include Italy's League Party, the National Rally in France, and Germany's AfD. Now, while the EPP largely represents mainstream European conservatism, the ECR and ID are generally labelled as the radical or far-right groups in the European Parliament. Don't let that fool you into thinking that the ECR and ID groups get along. In fact, there are some pretty significant rifts opening up between them. One notable divide between the two camps that's reared its head recently has been between two of Europe's top right-wing personalities, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who leads the ECR, and Marine Le Pen of France's National Rally, the ID group's second largest party. Now, the key divide between them has been their approach to the European Union, with Le Pen maintaining her hostility to the Union, while Meloni has become an EU power player, working closely with Commission President Ursula von der Leyen of the EPP. In fact, since taking office, Meloni has established herself as someone on the so-called radical right that Europe's centre-right leaders can still do business with. For example, she travelled with Ursula von der Leyen and played a key role in securing for the EU migration-curbing deals with the likes of Tunisia and Egypt, while von der Leyen herself has taken a number of trips to Italy for joint appearances. Now, there are a few different factors going on behind this partnership. For Meloni, it's proven an effective way of pushing her anti-migration agenda at the EU level, while for von der Leyen, Meloni may prove to be a key ally in securing her re-election as Commission President. And adopting a harder line on migration can also be seen as a strategy by von der Leyen's EPP to prevent voters from defecting to the further right. As we said earlier, the Meloni-von der Leyen double act has angered identity and democracy politicians like Marine Le Pen, who, in a speech in March, suggested that Meloni would support a second term for von der Leyen, and said that in doing so, she would contribute to the worsening of policies that Europeans are suffering from. But this divide between the ECR and ID isn't totally surprising, given the fact that they are, after all, different parliamentary groups. But the right-wing infighting isn't just limited to being between groups. There are also splits and tensions within each group too. The ECR, for example, is currently experiencing a mini-crisis over the potential of Fidesz, the party of Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, joining the group. For context, Fidesz has been without a parliamentary group since it left the EPP in 2021, and Orban has said that he wants the party to join the ECR. Now, Giorgia Meloni, who has acted as something as a bridge between Brussels and Budapest, has signalled openness to Fidesz joining her group, as has the former Polish Prime Minister, whose Law and Justice Party is the largest member of the ECR. But this has caused a great deal of consternation among other ECR member parties, frustrated at things like Orban's hostility towards Ukraine, friendliness with Vladimir Putin, and hobbling of the EU's agenda. For example, ECR member parties from Sweden and Romania have threatened to quit the ECR if Orban's Fidesz party joins, while the Czech and Slovakian ECR parties have stated their opposition too. Fidesz joining would also strain relations between the ECR and EPP, given the hostility between Orban and von der Leyen's European Commission. At the same time, there are also tensions between the Identity and Democracy group too, with Marine Le Pen again finding herself involved in the beef. Earlier this year, Le Pen publicly distanced herself from Germany's AfD, a Follow ID member, which came after news broke of a clandestine meeting of far-right leaders, including certain AfD politicians, at which so-called remigration plans to deport foreigners and unassimilated citizens were discussed. A story which we talked about in another TLDR EU video. Anyway, Le Pen, who has been seeking to make the national rally more palatable to mainstream voters, condemned this meeting and said that she was in total disagreement with the ideas discussed at the meeting. She even floated the possibility of reassessing or cutting ties with the AfD, although a decision won't be made until after the June European elections. Since then, further rifts have also opened up between the supposedly allied AfD and National Rally, as the former perhaps sought to get revenge on the latter. Specifically, the AfD's leader lodged a letter in the German parliament questioning the territorial status of France's overseas department of Mayotte, which just so happens to be the region where Le Pen scored some of her biggest presidential election results and where she would soon visit for European election campaigning. So, to wrap this up, what does this mean for the radical or far-right's influence in the European Union? Well, for starters, their feuds make talk of a hard-right ECR-ID merger or a formal alliance seem like a non-starter. And while that will to some extent limit their influence, it doesn't take away the fact that Europe will likely undergo a considerable shift rightwards following the European parliamentary elections, where one of the radical right groups could well become the third largest grouping in the European Parliament. So while a formal alliance of right-wing forces is out of the picture, we could expect, as Dr. Stephanie Luke puts it, an ad hoc right-wing issues-based alliance to become a more common feature in the next European Parliament. There's definitely going to be new developments with this story though, so keep an eye out for future changes. Actually, the best way to stay on top of the news is with Nebula News. If you haven't heard, we've just launched a project alongside our partners at Nebula called Nebula News, where every day the TLDR team curates a selection of videos that matter the most in the world right now. As you surely already know, Nebula is the thoughtful streaming service that's pushing boundaries on what independent creators can do with their content, including Nebula News, where we handpick a feed of content that should help you keep up to date with everything you need to sound smart and be truly informed. We believe that in a confusing and overwhelming news environment, knowing what to pay attention to is important. You can't track every story, so our curation should help to surface what really matters, showing you videos from TLDR and other superb creators that will help you understand the world around you quickly and easily. It's not just the curated news content brought to you directly by us. Nebula also features loads of exclusive original content. That's things like Real Life Law's brand new series War Room, which every month runs you through a whole load of ongoing conflicts to keep you in the loop. You can also watch every TLDR video on Nebula ad-free, and in many instances, before they land on YouTube. Now, if you're already subscribed to Nebula, then you can find the brand new Nebula News section at nebula.tv/news. And make sure to bookmark or save that link so that you can use it as your TLDR-ified news homepage. If you're not a member already, you can click the link in the description to sign up now. If you do, you'll get 40% off an annual plan by using our link. That's less than £2 a month. Plus, Nebula will know that you came from us, which really helps us out.